Okay, brand new quote from Tetsuya Nomura himself, the man, the myth, the legend. Let's see what he has to say. Nomura says that Sephiroth's sword has the ability to grow longer as needed. The Masamune blade has an organic quality to it, he says, lengthening and shortening as needed. In the recently released second season of the first soldier arc in Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis, there is actually a scene in which the Masamune grows longer for the first time. I would love for you to check it out. Literally. What the actual? When Final Fantasy VII Remake was first announced all the way back in 2015, it was followed by a long period of silence. Initially, development was handled by CyberConnect 2, and though we have no idea how much, if any, of their work was used in the final product, it was clear that the relationship wasn't working out, as evident by them being removed. While we never got an official explanation, the fact that they aren't really credited in any visible way in the final game suggests that Square Enix did a lot of the heavy lifting on the game. This likely caused a massive internal delay, and it ultimately took the game about 4 years to resurface publicly. As a result, the development for the first part of Final Fantasy VII Remake ended up being notoriously lengthy. The development pacing would completely change with the release of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. After the DLC intermission and the PC version launching in 2021, that's when development on Rebirth really began. Because those endeavors were in-house, they actually started working on Rebirth about a year after it released. With Remake's development starting in 2014 and then the game releasing in 2020, it took about 6 total years to create. However, this time, with Rebirth, the development cycle only took about 3 years. That's about half the amount of time that it took to develop the first game. And this really blew people away, because Square Enix managed to create one of the highest quality, most content-dense games that I've ever played, and they did it in the fraction of the time that it normally takes other AAA developers. Even when you account for direct sequels and heavy asset reuse, Rebirth still stands out for how quickly and efficiently it came together. And now it looks like, with everything they built up from Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, could be making the third part of this trilogy come faster than anyone anticipated. And that's exciting, because this may not just point to the future of Final Fantasy VII, but possibly to the future of Final Fantasy as a whole, and might show what Creative Studio 1 could be capable of as they move on to their next project, as today's news is a strong indicator of how fast the next project could be coming. But first, be sure to check out Instant Gaming, who offers you Steam codes at a discounted price. Right now, you can get a digital deluxe version of Elden Ring Night Rain for only $48. On the Steam storefront, this would cost $55, so you save a total of $7. And the best part is that every month we give away a free game of your choice. All you have to do is click the link below, hit the participate button, and you are entered to win. So get games at cheaper prices and maybe win a free game each month. You can do all that and more with the link in the description and pinned comment below. So recently, Cody Christian, the voice actor for Cloud, posted an Instagram story showing himself back in the recording booth. In the story, he captioned the photo with, "So happy to be back with my bestie." You could see this little depiction of Cloud. It's a small detail, but it's a clear sign that he's currently recording voice lines for Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3. Of course, the story was quickly deleted, but of course, that just makes the intent of posting it even more obvious, and it was probably taken down because Square Enix wasn't happy about it, especially because it started generating buzz across social media. Actor slip-ups are probably the most common form of leak in video games and film, so this sort of thing happens all the time, and so really it's not that surprising. Usually voice actors just want to share with their fans what they're working on, and they're usually very excited about their work, but fans are very good at reading into things, picking up clues, making educated guesses, and doing their research. But it also really doesn't help when you post something with that little cloud emoji. Doesn't take long for people to put 2 and 2 together, and it's pretty obvious what's going on. But with that being said, we love Cody, and he's a great voice actor for Cloud Strife. Now recently, Nomura has revealed some brand new artwork for Safer Sephiroth, and this is supposed to be for their Magic the Gathering collaboration. However, it seems like the artwork is going beyond being just a new card for the TCG, with Nomura saying on the official Final Fantasy VII Twitter page, quote, "This time around I drew Sephiroth on the front and back sides of the card. I actually drew them so that they would join up I've placed one on top of the other. So if you manage to get two of the same card and line them up, you'll see how the original illustration looked. There is also a reason that the design for Safer Sephiroth is different from the original game, but I unfortunately can't share more about that. Shockingly, almost clearly stating that, hey, this is essentially the design for Safer Sephiroth for Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3. It's insane that he would choose to reveal this through a Magic the Gathering collaboration. If anything, I figured he would have went with the OG design for Safer Sephiroth. What's notably different about this design is that Sephiroth has two clearly defined arms. Normally, Safer Sephiroth only has one with a wing attached to the other appendage. This is a lot more similar to his design in Dissidia NT, which is also an original Safer Sephiroth design, but in that design, Sephiroth does indeed have two functional arms. There's also the gold feather trim around the arm, which appears to be new. What does this mean for the game? Essentially, the fact that the voice recording is already happening, especially in English, and the fact that we're getting the final boss design of the game already suggests that Part 3 is much further along than any of us would have expected, especially with Rebirth having just released over a year ago. However, the development team already confirmed soon after Rebirth that they were working hard on Part 3. The devs spoke at a South Korean gaming exhibition, G-Star 2024, back in November, with Japanese publication 4Gamer writing what they discussed, saying, quote, "The plot for the third game has now been completed. The concept has been decided and the development team is already working on it. The importance of the concept was also discussed in this lecture. However, it was not officially revealed, as it would be difficult for the company to announce it here. Though this does highlight how far along the third game is. A lot of major groundwork has been clearly completed. And it's important to remember that English voice recording typically happens much later in a Japanese game's development. This is something that usually happens when the scenes in the game have already been mostly finalized, as re-recording and adjusting scenes, especially across multiple languages, quickly becomes expensive, time-consuming, and can ultimately delay a project. There is also an assumption here that considering that Part 3's version of Safer Sephiroth has already been approved, and is unlikely to change, which I imagine is a requirement for them to even put this in the Magic the Gathering collaboration, suggests that the project is far enough along for this to happen in the first place. This leads me to believe, and I know this is going to sound insane, but Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3 could be coming as early as 2026, just 2 to 2.5 years after Rebirth. I know that sounds far-fetched at first, especially when you consider how long it takes for video games to be developed nowadays, but there are a few things that make me think it's possible. Again, if we look back at Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, this is a game that only took 3 years of development time, and that's with a number of major changes. They had to transition to PlayStation 5 hardware, create entirely new assets for character models like Sid and Vincent, not to mention the fact that they redid all the models for the main cast. For some reason. I mean, they look good, but so did the ones from Remake. They've already built out a large majority of the world map, designed a ton of minigames, and all the other massive amount of content Rebirth offers. And they still managed to pull it off in just 3 years. In fact, one of the main reasons they're not doing any DLC for Rebirth is because they wanted to jump straight into developing Part 3. Square has essentially said that skipping DLC will allow them to focus all their resources on speeding up the next game's development, with them saying in an interview, quote, "We definitely do hear the desire from fans, the voices out there that want that kind of thing. I understand it completely, but I think, from my perspective, what the fans really want to see the most is not necessarily DLC. They want to see the third part of the series as quickly as possible. Hard to deny that that's not the truth. That's exactly what I want to see. In some ways, we've already seen things like the Tiny Bronco demoing how the airship might look like and work. Sure, they'll need to add a few locations to Part 3 and expand on what you can do in existing areas. But it's not just the established tech or the library of assets that's going to make this roll so much faster. One of the biggest attributing factors for why Rebirth was released so fast was the fact that the team stayed together. As the team stayed together, they learned how to problem solve faster. They were able to develop team synergy, ironically enough. And when you add all of these factors together, you could see how Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3 could come out even even sooner than Rebirth did. So I think 2026 is more than just wishful thinking. I think it's entirely plausible. It would also follow a similar releasing structure that we saw with the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy, where FF13 first launched in Japan in 2009, 13-2 launched 2 years later, and then Lightning Returns wrapped everything up 2 years later after that, where the sequels for Final Fantasy XIII ended up taking tremendously less time than the original game. My biggest hope, however, is that the Final Fantasy VII team can stay together and work on Final Fantasy XVII. Not only because I think they've done some of the finest work that Final Fantasy has seen in the 20 years since 10, but also because they seem to have such a well-oiled machine going here that they could probably make FF17's development go pretty fast. In particular, this team already has a lot of Final Fantasy specific tech already developed. For example, they're working on the airships for Remake Part 3, but this team would then be able to turn around and make Final Fantasy XVII have an airship fairly easy. They already know exactly how to design it, they've already made the tech, and they could literally recycle all of that into Final Fantasy XVII and have that available for us day one. They already have things like a combat system that hybrids action and turn-based, a system that has gotten more universal acclaim than any FF since 10. If they were to build on those things, change things up, add new variety, etc., just like they used to do during the Golden Era, then we could potentially see a new mainline Final Fantasy game being developed much faster. And while the development speed won't be quite as fast as Rebirth or whatever this third game ends up being, it will likely be a lot faster than them completely starting from scratch. Though this being said, if Part 3 is announced soon, it would honestly be something that Square Enix really needs right now, because as things currently stands, Square Enix hype is kind of dead. There are no major games officially announced coming in the near future other than Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD and Bravely Default HD Remaster. But in terms of new games, there really isn't a huge amount of new stuff on the horizon. I was expecting they might reveal something alongside the Nintendo Switch 2 announcements, but again, other than Bravely, that really didn't happen. Kingdom Hearts 4 seems to be completely missing in action, and it actually looks like we might get all 3 parts of Remake before we actually get KH4, which is hilarious. Dragon Quest 12 is also still looking incredibly far off, and I don't imagine a Final Fantasy 17 happening anytime soon, at least not until this team finishes. So that happening sooner than later would give fans something to be excited about. But this is just my estimation on Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3 based on where the English voice recording currently is, and the fact that we have already gotten a look at what Safer Sephiroth is going to look like. Hit the subscribe button, let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you all in the next video. Later, guys.